Hello, my soul seeking friends. It's Shanna. Thank you so much for listening to Sense of Soul podcast. Enlightening conversations with like minded souls from around the world, sharing their journey of finding their light within, turning pain into purpose, and awakening to their true sense of soul. If you like what you hear, show me some love and rate, like, and subscribe. And consider becoming a Sense of Soul Patreon member, where you will get ad-free episodes, monthly circles, and much more. Now go grab your coffee, open your mind, heart, and soul. It's time to awaken. Today on Sense of Soul, I have Derek Loudermilk. He is a professional adventurer, a quantum business coach. He's a time traveler, a conscious researcher, telepathy trainer, a four-time best-selling author, a speaker, a digital nomad, a father, and founder of Adventure Quest Travel. Derek also is the podcast host of the Derek Loudermilk Show and a founding member, alongside myself and other amazing podcasters, of the Ethereal Network. I saw Derek on one of those amazing shows, The Skeptic Metaphysician, with Karen and Will, and he was talking about space and time, which is such a mystery. And I feel like I experience time travel, whether it's through the Gnostic Gospels or just daydreaming into space. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with Derek today to get his take on time travel. So please welcome Derek. Hey, Derek, I'm super excited to talk about time today. What is time? Time is an illusion, is it not?
Time is so interesting. I don't think I fully understand it, but right, so everything's happening in the now. I was talking to my 7-year-old recently, and I was like, "What time is it right now? It's now." And he's like, "Okay, it's now, but what about the future?" I was like, "Well, if I ask you that in a little bit, you would still say it's now." So he was really getting that everything happens in the sort of the eternal now. But we have a particular experience of time as 3D Earth humans, where we perceive it unfolding linearly. And I presume that there is a very good reason for that. Like it's a tool to help us segregate learning experiences in a way that we can sort of process them physically. Because when we're in matter form, when we're in this sort of dense 3D environment, we have the physical senses. We have like this beautiful chance to experience through our senses. And I feel like time is part of this sensory experience. Like there's no other way to get that. Like if you're an angel or a light being or something, like you're just not going to have that option. So it's really something beautiful to have, but it can also be, because it's not like the fundamental reality of the universe, it's also changeable by your perspective. So that's when I started playing around with time bending and time dilation. And when you want to travel somewhere and you want to get there faster, or if you need more time to get your work done, or if you want to be in the right place at the right time, all those are components. Simply by shifting your perspective can start to change the physical experience of time.
I had a dream one time. I had three books on this shelf in my dream, and I could only see the spines of the book. The first book said, "You are." And the second book said, "At the right place." And the last one said, "At the right time."
That's awesome.
But I like that you said to kind of look at time as a tool. I feel like that's something tangible for me.
Yeah, so for example, one thing that I often repeat, a mantra that's sort of developed in my own mind, is whenever your problems are created, they're already solved. Right? If you're looking at a timeline from a higher perspective, it's simultaneous. Right? So all of your problems are solved. So that means you can just relax and trust the whole journey, right? Because you're here on Earth School to have certain experiences and be of service in certain ways, et cetera, et cetera. So you might as well enjoy that process. And if you're really into human mode, if you're really into like productivity, entrepreneurial, got to get a podcast out, whatever, then you may want a certain experience, which is like at the end of the day, I feel like I'm done. So what
Mm.
you're really after is not more time. You're after a feeling of completion, which is like we were kind of talking about before the show. It's the frequency, that feeling of I'm free to do whatever because I've gotten my work done. Or I want to make sure, I'm looking at my clock all day because I want to make sure I get my kids from school when I'm supposed to. This was one of my early experiments because I was like, I'm just gonna arrive at the time when I'm supposed to get my kids, but not look at the clock all day. So I went through my whole day. We actually had a big adventure. We went and rode our bikes like 70 kilometers in a different state across the river into Illinois because we're in St. Louis. And I arrived and I was perfectly on time. Like some people
Mm.
arrived early, some people arrived late. I was the only one that was perfectly on time. But it wasn't because I was looking at my clock. It was because I had tuned into that frequency of arriving on time, which is an experience, which is different than the clock time.
And we do that kind of stuff unconsciously all day. We get hungry at a certain time, or we wake up at a certain time. Even if we know we can sleep in. I hate those days. I'm like, why am I still waking up at 7 a.m.? It is true. So our bodies kind of start to join in to this time, this pattern, I guess it would be, or repetition.
hmm Yeah, and I've been thinking recently, I haven't confirmed or denied this, but I've considered the concept that every year is the same year. And that is to say, it's a cycle demarcated by our position around the sun, right? That's the year, but it's
Mhm.
a time cycle. But because everything's the present, it's like always the same year over and over again. So like this spring is last spring is next spring. That was just something that kind of I was like, I think there's something there because it makes my mind hurt a little bit.
Same year, but having different experiences.
Yeah, and there's definitely something to when I coach entrepreneurs and from my own experience, there's often great benefit from you want to be able to focus your energy on your best possible work. So if you can have a routine that's largely set, then you can be really productive. You can do your focus work. Like if you're writing a book and all you have to do is think about that book because your meals and your clothes choices and everything else is already pre-made, it opens up this wonderful energy to focus everything on the output that you're achieving. Now, that's counterproductive when you want to make a timeline shift or you want to experience a new experience of reality. So you have to totally switch gears and go the other direction and sort of do everything brand new if you want to jump into a new experience. Like if you want to accelerate your career path or your relationship, or you want to experience great abundance instantly, you basically have to throw out your routine as much as you can and have completely novel experiences because that sort of opens up infinite possibility. So you have to be kind of behave unpredictably when you want to take a quantum leap, and you have to behave predictably when you want to do like a deep focused work.
Someone who has ADHD, I'm very impulsive, very spontaneous, very just on the fly. I say oftentimes throughout the day, there's not enough hours in the day. I need a clone. I'm always like this. My dad used to say I was like a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. I mean, I am like that. But I do manifest very easily. And sometimes I do it in desperation. And I've had people challenge me on that. Like, why would you always want to be, only manifesting when you're desperate for when you need something? Why not plan it in advance, set the intention and get it? But it's interesting because when you're talking about that, I was like, that's probably why I'm more connected with that because I can't easily let go. I'm not very attached to things. I can't be
Mm.
because they're shuffling all the time for me.
Yeah, I think there's certain types of people that naturally work from infinite possibility more. before I was a metaphysical explorer, I was a professional adventurer, traveling the world, living in different cultures and going to meet different tribes and things like that. And when you're an adventurer, you really have no idea what's going to happen. And that means anything can happen, right? And there's the yes and mentality is like when you get to a choice point, then you tune in like, oh, this is exciting for me. Then like, yeah, let's go. And it's just like the series of doors that keep opening. And so certain people, certain lifestyles get you in practice. It's kind of a way of training how to recognize good luck, right? Because some
Mm.
people might totally miss their wonderful opportunities because they're not tuned into it. But if you can see the miracles as they're coming to you, then it's easier to just pick them up, right? When they arrive.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. I'm with you on that. So I was telling you earlier that I've been studying the Gnostic Gospels. And when I'm like studying something, I go deep into those rabbit holes. I'm a rabbit hole diver. But then there has to be this balance. I have four children, right? I'm like the head of this household. But I do have a hard time keeping track of time sometimes, but I will get that moment where I'm like, I gotta go, and I'll go. And my daughter even said to me this morning, or was it yesterday? Yes, yesterday we're on our way to her hair appointment. She goes, even though it seems like, Mom, you're always in a hurry, you're always on time. I'm like, right on time. But I do get that. I'll be involved in something here, and then I'm able to be pulled out very quickly and shift. And I do this with people all over. But this is like time jumping, isn't it? Now that I'm thinking about it, because all of my focus and energy is here. And then I'm like, whew, it's almost like I'm changing and shifting almost my entire vibration and frequency to match the next moment.
Do you think you had a lifetime back then in the Jesus Gnostic Gospel era?
I must be because I'm obviously obsessed with it. I think anybody who is really drawn to different, periods like that, my little girl, she's obsessed with like King Henry. I'm like, what? You're 11. I mean, just strange, right? I know this other kid who's obsessed with Titanic. So I think that, yeah, there is something to be said about that there might be. And I did have a past life regression that put me around that time, but nobody significant. There wasn't like a Jesus or anything like that, but there was that time.
Cool. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that stuff is fascinating, right? Um we have this story with my little girl. She has a birthmark. And birthmarks are often physical manifestations of injuries from other lifetimes. And someone I was interviewing was doing reading her records or something like that. And they said, "Oh yeah, she was this man in Spain in Sevilla and
Mm.
he got burned at that spot." It turns out we had taken her on a road trip to Sevilla when we lived in Portugal. We were like, we could go anywhere. Let's go to Sevilla.
Yeah.
And when she was a baby, and so we took her like back to the exact site of this particular lifetime
Hmm.
where she was injured. And it's like, because I've done all this world traveling, only before like probably there was like all kinds of like loose ends, threads that I was going to tie up in these places or like going to connect with a certain frequency of these places. Like there's a lot to you know, astrocartography and all these things. It's like, wow, there's so much more going on than simply just picking a place and going to it
Right.
or
There has to be, right? I mean, you have to wonder why somebody always wants to go to Hawaii every year and someone wants to just go to New Orleans, like me.
I usually sort of think of lifetimes as like you take a bit of a break in between chronological time.
A little
Um,
vacation.
I've had my kids have mentioned some weird stuff, and when I'm like, "Can you tell me more about that?" They're like,
Yeah.
"Nah, not interested. Like, it's not relevant." I'm like, "But you were just telling me." They're like, and it's so it's like it kind of like bleeds in from somewhere else. It's not really conscious, I don't think. Because in my experience, when you ask them about it, they don't really know much more
Mhm.
details. Because it would be really cool to get verifiable details, like I was this historical figure, and you can look me up, and here's everything, and
Right.
um, but
Yeah, which a lot of people do claim that. I can't tell you how many Mother Marys I've met.
see, I always like to, you know, take okay, you have this bit of information, like maybe there's some truth here, but let's run a little experiment. Like, what if I had a friend, we both happened to live in Budapest, Hungary, before we met, but we that was one thing we had in common. And she was like, the whole time I was there, I would felt like I was dying or about to die. And I was like, what was up with that? And it turns out she um was conceived from a sperm donor who is Ashkenazi Hungarian Jew, and there was
Wow.
a genocide there.
Mm.
And so she has this epigenetics in her that made her like feel the genocide when she was there. And I was like, whoa, that's
Yeah.
made
I
really
I have had
intense.
that. Sometimes I'm confused or I'm not really sure whether this is a past life or if this is something from my ancestries. I did have a past life that I recalled. It was my first session in New Orleans on a plantation. Then I did my ancestry and we went to some of these plantations because they're still around. But they're in my tree. So we went there, this Creole plantation. We're there and I'm in the slave quarters. And I couldn't leave that space. I mean, I'm feeling it right now. I'm feeling this rise in me, right? My energy's rising almost up to my throat at the
Wow.
moment. I was almost paralyzed in that moment, in that space. But I've been to lots of plantations, but that one, that place, in that moment, there was the connection.
And did anything shift for you after that experience?
Yeah, that's when I started to go deep into the healing. So that's what I do. So
Hmm.
I've worked on probably over 200 trees and I help people build their tree. But I knew that there were stories that needed to be told. And in telling them, there was so much healing. Yeah.
Family trees, you mean?
Mhm. Yeah, we do the lineage.
Ah,
We go back. Yeah.
ah,
Mhm.
interesting. Cool.
But there was a connection between the past life and the ancestry.
But you know what I just thought of was that I think sometimes people will incarnate in their same family, like skipping
Mhm.
generations. So that they might
Yeah.
even get to experience their like they might be their own great grandchild kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, have you
No.
heard then about that there were dark-skinned people here
Yeah.
before the slave trade? Like not Native American, not Indians here,
Like they were
like
native here.
yeah. Have you heard of this?
Like from when?
Like
Like they live
pre-Columbian.
here. Yeah. So I've heard that there's Egyptian hieroglyphs in Grand Canyon, right?
Well,
Have you
yeah,
heard
there's
about
this
those?
cave just across the river here that had they discovered there was like 4,000 Egyptian artifacts in it.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the pyramids, all of these very similar, and they're in different parts of the world. I do believe that they were here probably before. Yeah. There's evidence of it
Well,
all
just
over.
across from here from St. Louis, we have
For real.
the Cahokia Mountains, which is
Yeah.
it's an earthen pyramid, but it's huge. You know, it's like 300 feet tall and like a mile, quarter mile wide. It's big. And in these mounds, so they used to call this mound city because there
Right.
was hundreds of Indian mounds. And in some of those mounds were giants. And there was a population of modern humans in Alton, Illinois, that were giants. Like the world's tallest people were from Alton, Illinois. You know,
Oh,
9 feet tall people. And everyone was like, oh, it's just this one family. But I think it's probably a relic of the tribe of giants that lived here time ago. I'm not sure.
yeah. I mean, look at they even found like a Stonehenge. What is it? Somewhere in I went maybe in like Michigan. I forget where it was.
Oh, Stonehenge.
Somewhere.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's underneath the water here in the States. They found it
Oh,
not too
wow.
long ago. I know.
Whoa,
It's crazy.
that's
It's just
cool.
not too long ago, like in the last decade. It's insane. So
That's
yeah,
funny.
I do think there was people here.
The whole Egyptian thing, like um how there's a Cairo, there's a Memphis, there's a
Mhm.
Luxor, there's all these same names like in similar river positions, and people are like the Nile is the Mississippi. I still don't
Nile,
really understand that
Mississippi.
theory. It doesn't really make
Yeah.
sense exactly, but because because the Great Pyramid is in Egypt, right? It's like when you listen to people like Matthias de Stefano, and he remembers the lifetime where they settled from Atlantis. The survivors from Atlantis went to Egypt and started that civilization there. And nobody really talks about North America that much.
Maybe it was a time traveler that came back to discover these places, or maybe it was some sort of past life wisdom or something like that.
There could be like potentially like the physical world is actually changing as well, according to our
Oh.
perceptions of it. And so I think it can get really fuzzy, like what civilizations were where and how long ago certain things happened, because I think the actual physical reality shifts according to our consensus perceptions of it. And I
Mhm.
was going to say, I've had experiences where physical reality changed for me in an instant. And so I could see how easy it would be to have a map be a totally different map or a civilization be in a totally different place. What scientists and historians really want to do is they want to like dust their hands off and say, like, we figured it out, like that, check that
Yeah,
off and it's done, you
your
know.
narrative.
But that's not really how it works.
No, because if you look at those old maps, they don't make any sense. And some people believe even Jesus was here. That's so crazy. Have you heard that one?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, like even like parts of, yeah, it's so crazy. I have a cousin who we study our ancestor, who is a great shaman in Canada, and we study him together and we became super close and he's super into that. And him and his friends do a YouTube on this all the time and sometimes I'll catch one, but I find it fascinating. And I'm just that person that I'm open to anything. I stopped living by what everybody else told me a long time ago. We're living in a time that is so distorted and based off of everybody else's narrative about history when we don't know the true history. And it's really concerning to me. So I'm always going back in time, but I'm going back in time to find out what it means with my own eyes, with my new eyes.
Yeah. So would you consider yourself to be remote viewing?
Sometimes intentionally I have. I'll set my intentions. And I think I've heard you say this as well. I use my dreams a lot if I
Hmm.
want answers. I've used meditation, so I have used these things. So maybe I am using time as a tool.
Well, I mean, understanding how non-local consciousness works is is a really important foundational skill, right? So you can go back and you can remote view the life of Jesus. Like you could see actually what he was up to. You could get your perspective on the data as it exists, right, in the record, in the Akashic records. You could also, if you had a lifetime at that time, you could go and view through the eyes of that person. Like you could get
Mm.
firsthand experience from that lifetime. And remote viewing in general, I mean, you could use remote viewing in the modern era. Like we talk about politicians being corrupt and things like that. Like if everybody practiced remote viewing, then they wouldn't be able to hide corruption. So it would be this automatic, like we could just know whether people, one, were telling the truth, and two, if their intentions were good and where their intentions are coming from, and three, if their plans are actually going to have the effect that they are saying they're going to, right? We could even remote view into the near future and see like if they put this policy in place, what are the outcomes, right? So it is a skill that can make you immune to other people's manipulation when you use your own ability to access non-local information. That is information that's not in your physical body, right?
Okay.
Telepathy, remote viewing, lucid dreaming, all these things get you data from other places in space-time. And so cultivating that skill is, I think, fundamental to improve human society.
We talked about this before we got on the frequency. Been doing the Rasha scalar energy machine. I would do it every Saturday. And so my frequency started to, well, according to Dr. Jerry, where I'm actually tapping into that junk DNA that they say you don't need. And so as I was doing that, there was all kinds of things happening, all kinds of mystical experiences I was having, and I felt this protection around me, and I felt like I was in a bubble. No one could hear me anymore either. But I was able to go back into time and see and learn like I had never before.
Mm, that's amazing. Yeah. Um, Super cool. And I might say that raising your frequency in that sense just sort of heightened your abilities, right? Your extrasensory
Right.
perception abilities.
Right.
They talk about the importance of gratitude.
Yeah.
And gratitude is sort of the fastest way of taking your frequency to a higher frequency and moving right from the third to fourth density or from the third to the fifth dimension. That's the difference between like negative emotions, negative experiences, like we're talking about the Hawkins scale of consciousness here. 250 megahertz is when you get to neutral, and then above that you get to sort of hope and possibility and love and gratitude and unconditional love and all those things. And you get access to a lot more of your abilities when you're operating in a love frequency or higher. It's kind of is a correlation that happens. So even having these external, like I haven't used that particular system that you're talking about, but we use FLFE, focused life force. Actually, after Will mentioned it in one of his, because he interviewed these people who had started this, and it was so crazy when we tested it out. You can, for anyone listening, you can go look it up, flfe.net. You can get a
Mhm.
free trial. But we tested out with a free trial, and as soon as I clicked turn on frequency, like to elevate the frequency of our house, basically our physical location, the baby was up late and crying and fussing and not going to sleep. As soon as I turned that on, he was like, oh, and just zoned out, went right to sleep. And I was like, whoa, a click button put the baby to
Wow.
sleep. That's pretty cool. So we've been using that ever since, and you can tell a difference for sure.
Here's the thing. I didn't seek any of this. So I maybe would seek experience. Like you're a seeker of experience and I love it. You're so fun. I can't believe the stuff that you've done. I feel like my journey, it just lands in my lap and I'm like, okay, I'm like on a ride. I'm on
Hmm.
a roller coaster. Never, don't even know where I'm going next.
But the fundamental skill or the fundamental way of being is that you go along with the ride, right?
Mm.
You're not resisting it. And there's an element of adventure. There's an element of trust in there, right? It's a big unknown. A lot of people have trouble trusting things that are out of their control. Um,
Yeah.
so I would say these are like identity level traits that facilitate you to move quickly through this stuff, right?
I think you're right. And I think a lot of times it's hard to put my finger on it. When people want to know, like, how'd you get here? You know what I mean? How'd you get here?
And you could
And
you could flip it around, right? You can examine like people who have everything that what it takes to be successful in some realm, and yet they're not, right? It could be some healing that they still have to do. Could be some energetic thing, right? It could just be that they don't have the proper identity to allow them to have the thought patterns, belief structures, etc., that would allow them to succeed. So it's simply a matter of just getting into the subconscious and tinkering with the identity because a lot of things flow from there. how you approach your decisions comes from your identity.
So when you're bringing along with you strengths of your ancestors or your past lives or all of those things, I feel like that is part of me all the time.
Well, and what you've done is you've said, okay, maybe this will be helpful. I'm going to take this on as an identity. But the real trick is to be able to pick up and put down those things as needed. That is to say, to not have attachment even to the things that are helpful for you. Like if you're like, I'm a smart person and I'm good at getting things done, or I'm, whatever, you also need to be willing to set down those parts of yourself, that's the hard part. A lot of
Mhm.
people are like, I'm willing to cut cords and get rid of the things that don't serve me.
Yeah.
But you really need to be able to cut cords with everything so that you can allow the full truth of yourself to emerge, right? If there's something that is always part of you, you can't cut it out, right? If there's like a fundamental nature to who you are, then it doesn't matter whether you let it go because it's just going to still continue to be part of you. So this is something I learned from the shaman I apprenticed under, but you have to be willing to let go of the things that you like about yourself in addition to the things that you don't like about yourself.
Wow. So really you're just giving, you're surrendering. You're surrendering to the experience of what is possible.
Exactly. It facilitates that when you can surrender, then it moves you into a place of infinite possibility. As long as you are trying to control the possibilities or put your human beliefs or whatever on it, you might be able to think of 100 different possibilities. That's not
Yeah.
anywhere near infinite. And as soon as you let go of how things are supposed to look, it can
Hmm.
arrive, what you want can arrive much more quickly, much more fun, much more magic, right? That's what infinite possibility is like. Stuff just appears and it just works. Um, and there's this like, yeah, we talked about moving frequency, but also moving away from just whatever you're holding to be true.
Yeah. Oh, I was super bummed when that Rasha wasn't coming in my life anymore. I was like, what? But here's the thing. I can't get one. I can't force Dr. Jerry to bring it back to me every Saturday. So I literally, there was nothing I could do but just to surrender and wait almost like for the next frequency to arrive.
Well, really, those things are training tools in their best use, right? You would feel what it's like to have the assistance of that external frequency input,
Right.
and then you would just be able to get to that place of your own attention, right? So I think a lot of these physical devices, they're
Yeah.
really like bridging a gap for us before we can do it all on our own. So it's like a training device in a sense.
Yeah, like I used to need my pendulum during Reiki, but I don't anymore.
Hmm. I've heard that pendulums are not working as well anymore. That certain
Oh,
divination tools are less reliable than they used to be.
yeah.
Um, so
Well, maybe that's why, because I lost my old one, couldn't find a good new one. But my old one, when I do find it, sure is handy and pretty on point.
it's fun. I mean, my going back, we started this conversation with my 7-year-old. He takes his pendulum to school and they like do experiments with it, right? They play around with it. So
That's pretty cool. Yeah. Well, Derek, thank you so much. This has been such a fun conversation. It's truly one of those conversations where it is like there's no limits. I mean, it's like anything could happen with time when you're talking about time or possibilities and manifestation. I think that we've been so used to being in this tiny little box and we've been imprisoned in it. And it's just time to surrender and break out.
yeah, yeah, it's exciting. The shaman that I work with, he often talks about these two concepts of the tonal and the nagual, which is the tonal is like your you're human, you're person, when you're in a body and you have the experience of being in a body, but you also have to have this perspective of your higher self. And when you can have that dual perspective, like when you can see, yes, I'm operating in the 3D world, and I can also see from a higher perspective, like that this is a game, a matrix, a construct, then you don't get so sucked in to these beliefs that you acquire, right? Because you're not born with a certain set of beliefs. You pick them up based on you become domesticated. So
Mhm.
just observing the box and then making sure you can also observe the outside of the box at
Mhm.
the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, I destroyed the box. I've destroyed,
Love
it's
it.
it is interesting, and I think it's all about just knowing yourself. Like really, like you're such an adventurous when it comes to all of the esoteric and the healing world and just experience. I love that about you. But it all bringing you back to yourself. And like you said, your identity. And it's all within.
Hmm. Well put.
Yeah, tell everybody where they can find you, where they can get your books and your pod and where they can watch your podcast.
Yeah, sure. DerekLoudermilk.com, Loudermilk on all the socials and YouTube. The show is the Derek Loudermilk Show. So I just kind of took my name and put it everywhere.
Yeah, it's awesome. You have amazing people. We've had some similar guests, same guest, and it's a lot of fun. And I'm glad to be a part of the same network with you, and look forward to see what happens in the future with that. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, yeah, very
Yeah,
exciting.
yeah.
So
Well, thank you so much, Derek. You have a wonderful day and take care of those babies. You probably have to go get them from school soon.
yeah, yeah, thanks for having me. We'll talk soon.
All right, bye.
Bye, Shanna.
Thanks for listening to Sense of Soul podcast, and thanks to our special guests for joining me. If you want more of Sense of Soul, check out my website at www.mysenseofsoul.com, where you can work with me one-on-one or help support Sense of Soul podcast by donating to my coffee fund. Thanks for listening.